Looking back, I don't know why I ever thought it would be a good idea to break into the old Willow Hills Asylum. The place had been closed for decades after numerous reports of cruel psychiatric practices. Rumors of ghosts and bizarre happenings kept most people away. But for me, that just added to the allure. I was convinced the stories were exaggerated. How scared could I really get of an abandoned building? It started as a dare from some friends, one dark autumn night. We were out on a drive, looking for cheap thrills, when we passed the looming abandoned asylum on the edge of town. Ivy snaked up the weathered stone walls, and not a single light shone in the rows of shattered windows. "I bet you won't go inside," Jason taunted me. I just smiled and told him to pull over. "You're on," I said. We hopped the crumbling stone wall encircling the property and crept up to one of the back buildings. After tugging on a boarded-up door to no avail, we found a basement window with a missing panel. Shining our phone lights in, all seemed quiet. I hoisted myself up and slid through the narrow gap, landing on the dusty concrete floor. Looking around with the light, I saw I was in what looked like an old laundry room. Washing machines lined the walls, overturned carts spilled across the floor. "I'm in," I called up to my friends. "I'll just explore for a bit and meet you back at the car." They wished me luck and hurried off, clearly spooked themselves. But I was too cocky to be afraid. I started making my way through a warren of dark corridors. Much of the decaying furniture had been overturned, old papers and trash littered everywhere. Graffiti covered the peeling walls. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt, but I pushed the fear down. As I entered what looked like a common room, I swept my phone light over the dusty furniture and ancient TV set. Then my beam landed on something that made me freeze. Scrawled on the wall in what looked disturbingly like dried blood was a message. "Turn back now." A prickle of fear crawled up my spine, but I shook it off. Just some creepy vandalism, I thought. I pushed forward into a large cafeteria, long tables and broken benches strewn about. A loud metallic crash rang out from the industrial kitchen. I jumped, cursing myself for taunting the darkness. "Just stay calm," I told myself. But then another crash sounded even closer, like pots and pans being flung against metal. It didn't sound like an animal scrounging for food. It sounded intentional. My palms sweated as I crept into the kitchen. It appeared empty, still and silent. Then I heard a shuffling nearby. Whirling around, I scanned my light, but saw nothing. Then an unnatural, high-pitched giggle broke the quiet. I froze, feeling unseen eyes on me. Fear overwhelming me, I turned and ran from the room, not looking back. The insane laughter echoed, pursuing me as I sprinted down hallways aimlessly, desperate for an exit. Rounding a corner, I came face to face with a hulking figure dressed in filthy rags. I screamed as it reached for me with a large, gnarled hand. I managed to dodge its grasp and took off, only to find I'd reached a dead end. Frantically, I tried each door off the hallway until one opened. I darted inside and slammed it shut, jamming a broken chair under the handle. The massive thing outside pounded on the walls, making guttural noises. Shaking, I whirl around to see I'd trapped myself in a bathroom. Stalls with broken doors lined one wall, sinks torn from another. Backing away slowly, I bumped into one of the stall doors, causing it to swing open. A figure hung from the ceiling above the toilet, swaying slightly on the rope around its neck. I cried out in horror and stumbled back as the body reached towards me with a grotesque popping of its joints. Eyes bulging from purple flesh stared at me, pleading. I doubled over, gagging. Then I heard movement behind me. In the cracked mirror, I saw the apparition of an impossibly tall and skeletal woman crawling spider-like over the stalls, hollow eyes fixated on me. I screamed and turned to find the way out, blocked by a mass of pale, writhing ghosts clamoring at the door. Wailing faces peered out at me from the walls. Hands grasped from the crumbling tile floor underneath me. I screamed again, but no one could hear me. No one human, at least. I was surrounded by the tortured souls who called this place home. As they swarmed around me, screeching, I curled into a ball, burying my head and sobbing. I felt ghostly hands and tendrils envelop me, dragging me down into their nightmare realm. Perhaps I'd remain trapped there with them, just another lost spirit howling endlessly through the rotting asylum corridors. My arrogance had lured me into a fate worse than death. Next thing I knew, I was waking up in the back of an ambulance. Apparently, I'd been found unconscious just inside the asylum walls. According to the medics, I was nearly in shock and babbling incoherently about spectral things. They assumed I'd hit my head while trespassing, but I know what I experienced. And I pray those damned anguished souls remain contained behind the locked doors of the Willow Hills Asylum, because no place holds such darkness without reason. And now I fear its inner demons have found their way into my dreams to torment me forevermore. Urban exploring has always been a thrill for me. There's something about going deep into these crumbling, abandoned places that gets my adrenaline pumping. But when my friend Aaron told me about an old asylum that had been left to rot on the edge of town, I hesitated. Places with such dark histories carry their own kind of chill that give even me the creeps. But Aaron managed to convince me to check it out. I wish I had trusted my instincts and stayed far away. We went one gray Saturday morning, parking on a weed-choked road behind the massive asylum grounds. A 12-foot stone wall surrounded the property, but we found a spot where the crumbling masonry provided a gap just big enough to squeeze through. As we crawled into the compound, I felt an icy prickle on the back of my neck, like we were being watched. Ignoring the unease, we crept up to the main building. The edifice was all imposing Victorian brick and stone with iron-barred windows and towering smokestacks. Aaron jerked open an access door, the corroded metal screaming on its hinges. We flashlighted our way in only to be hit with a foul, musty blast of stale air. "This is the intake wing," Aaron whispered. "Patients would come in here first before being assigned to the wards." Shivering in the dank air, I followed him past intake processing rooms with ominously stained gurneys and tables. We emerged into a central corridor spoked with different ward wings. A faded directory hung crooked and cobwebbed on the wall. West Wing held the violent cases. East was for women. North Wing was solitary confinement, Aaron murmured as we stood reading. A skittering sound echoed from the darkness. I jumped, and Aaron grabbed my arm. "Just rats, probably," he said, but his face had gone pale. We moved on, the beam of our flashlights cutting through the gloom. Passing a patient records room, I noticed smudged lines on the floor, as if furniture had been dragged across the dusty surface. "Someone's been here," I said, nervously. Aaron just shrugged and pushed on toward the solitary north wing. Reaching the entrance, a heavy steel door hung ajar. Within, the hall was pitch black. Our lights revealed isolation chamber doors lining each side, all closed and padlocked from the outside. The further we went, the colder the air became. It reeked of bodily waste and antiseptic. From somewhere in the dark drifted the echoes of dripping water and rattling pipes. Then a soft whimper pierced the silence, the unmistakable sound of a woman crying. Aaron and I froze. A minute later it came again, faint but distinct. "Hello," I call out. "Who's there?" My voice wavered. The crying abruptly stopped as my words echoed down the hall. Silence returned. I turned to leave when we heard a loud crash. Spinning back, I saw a loose pipe had fallen, narrowly missing us. Aaron shook his head. "This place is coming apart. We should go." I couldn't agree more. We backtracked hurriedly through the dismal corridors. As we neared the intake wing, I heard shuffling footsteps behind us. I whipped my head around but saw only shadows. When we emerged into the intake area, I sighed with relief. But in our absence, the access door had slammed shut. Aaron rushed over and tugged frantically on the handle. It didn't budge. We were locked in. Frantically shining our lights around, we spotted an air duct near the floor. Prying off the rusty grating, we squeezed inside, replacing the grate behind us. On hands and knees, we crawled through the dusty air shaft until it opened near a broken window. We tumbled out into overgrown weeds, gasping the fresh air. I swore I saw a pale face peering through the barred window at us as we scrambled away. We didn't stop running till we reached the car. As Aaron drove us away, I glanced back and noticed a figure silhouetted in an upper window, watching us depart. A cold shiver ran through me. I'll never forget those cries echoing through that godforsaken place. Some say it was just urban legends haunting our imaginations in the dark, but I know what I heard. There are some places so stained with suffering that the echoes of the past bleed into the present. And once you enter, the spirits trapped within make sure you become part of the asylum's tragic story. The old Juniper Hills Asylum always fascinated me as a kid. It sat high on a hill overlooking town, an imposing Gothic structure that had been abandoned for decades. I used to stare up at its broken windows and wonder about the secrets held within those crumbling walls. When I heard about an overnight paranormal investigation being hosted there, I knew I had to join in. I was finally going to explore the haunted asylum I had only imagined in my childhood dreams. If only I had known then the true evil that place contained. I arrived on a moonlit Saturday night along with a dozen other thrill seekers. The wrought iron gate surrounding the asylum hung rusted and broken as we followed the exterior stone wall to the entrance. Our guide was a woman named Dana who claimed to be a psychic medium and paranormal investigator. She said she had sensed multiple malicious entities residing within the old asylum. According to her, we were in for a dangerous night. As we ascended the front steps, I gazed up at the imposing 4-story building. Dana unlocked the creaking front doors and led us into the dark lobby. Flipping a switch, she turned on her spirit box, a device that rapidly scans radio frequencies and is said to allow spirits to communicate by using the white noise. At first, we only heard the whirring and buzzing you'd expect, but just before heading up the main staircase, what sounded like a man's voice broke through. "Get out." A chill went down my spine. On the 4th floor, the room doors all stood open. We split into small groups to explore the various wards and treatment rooms. I was paired with 2 other women around my age, Sarah and Jade. We wandered down a hallway lined with tiny cell-like rooms. Dana had explained this was once the violent cases ward, where patients were locked in solitary confinement. Many had died alone and forgotten. "Why are these doors marked with scratches?" Sarah asked uneasily, shining her flashlight on the scarred wooden doors. Some even had messages like "hell" and "let me out" engraved by who knows what. Jade and I exchanged tense looks. Just then, we heard faint crying coming from inside one of the rooms. My heartbeat quickened. "Hello," I called out. Only echoing sobs answered back. Against my better judgment, I pushed open the cell door. My flashlight illuminated a small figure huddled in the corner, face buried against the floor. She appeared to be a young girl in a tattered nightgown, dark tangled hair hanging in her face. "Are you hurt?" I asked gently. Her head jerked up, revealing a face twisted in anguish, eyes sewn shut. I cried out and stumbled back as she screeched like an animal, crawling along the floor towards me with outstretched arms. We fled that room, only to find the hallway now vacant. Our group was gone. The asylum seemed much darker and colder suddenly. We roamed the maze like wards calling out for the others, but heard nothing. Turning a corner, we froze. Gurneys and wheelchairs lined the hallway, facing away from us as if waiting for ghostly occupants. Then faint whispers echoed around us, growing louder. Shadowy, human-like shapes of mist appeared in the corridor, drifting towards us. We took off, running only to reach a dead end. Turning back, we saw the entities blocking the only exit, howling angrily at our presence. "There!" Sarah cried, pointing to an open utility closet. We ducked inside what appeared to be an old laundry chute. Climbing in feet first, we slid down a long metal tunnel into the pitch-black depths of the asylum's bowels. We tumbled out into a massive, concrete-walled room housing rusted boilers and machinery dating back to the 1930s. Across the gloomy chamber, we spotted a caged spiral staircase along one wall leading up. As we climbed the metal steps, a thunderous boom echoed from the depths, followed by the rattling of chains. Sarah lost her footing and tumbled over the railing with a horrible shriek. I heard her land on the concrete floor below with a sickening thud. Fighting the urge to vomit, I continued upwards, Jade following behind. We had to find the others. We emerged onto the shadowy first floor, into what looked to have once been an operating room. Under the remnants of an antiquated surgical light sat a stained, bloodied table. High up on the wall hung props that could only be instruments of torture. Saws, drills, hooks, and chains. This place hadn't just been a sanitarium. It had been a chamber of horrors. Jade and I prayed the others would be somewhere close by now. We slowly opened the oar's rusted metal door, only to be greeted by inky darkness. Where had the lights gone? Gripping each other, we felt along the corridor wall until we heard voices ahead. Rounding a corner, relief washed over me at the sight of our group gathered by the front entrance. I began to call out to them when behind me, Jade let out an unearthly shriek. Whipping around, I watch in horror as shadow hands seem to reach from the darkness, pulling Jade backwards until she vanished into the blackness. Her screams faded, leaving only silence. I stood paralyzed in shock, alone in that empty ward. Then the faint whispering returned, closing in around me. I had to escape, bolting down the hall towards the others. I felt icy hands grabbing at my ankles, trying to hold me back. "Help me," I cried. But when I reached the entrance, only blood-splattered walls awaited me. My mind finally snapped. I remember little of what happened next. Flashing lights, sedation, restraining hands trying to control me. When I emerged from the fugue state, I was in a true hospital now, safe and warm in bed. The police told me I was the sole survivor. The others had been missing for days by the time I stumbled out alone from that cursed place, gripped by madness. I have no memory of what happened to them. The authorities blamed a dangerous cult using the abandoned building for rituals. But I know the truth, that some malevolent forces are better left buried. Secrets too dark for the mind to fathom, lest you be lost to shadow and flame in the depths of that God-forsaken tomb. When I saw that the old Willard Asylum was offering tours, I knew I had to go. I'd always been fascinated by the haunted history of the sprawling complex, which had closed down decades ago after claims of terrible conditions and mistreatment of patients. The Gothic stone buildings sat decaying on a hill just outside of town, and local legend held that the ghosts of former inmates still wandered the halls. I hoped a tour would let me separate fact from fiction. On a gray Saturday morning, I drove up the winding road leading to the asylum gates. They stood tall and rusted, chained shut with thick padlocks. As I walked from the parking area to the visitor center, I felt eyes watching me from the dark, cavernous windows of the main building looming ahead. I suppressed a shiver as I entered the visitor center where a few others were gathered for the tour. After signing waivers absolving the asylum of liability if we got injured, our guide arrived to lead us into the depths of the buildings. He was a wiry older man named Walter, who said he had worked at the asylum for years before it closed. As we began the tour, he recounted chilling but true tales of experiments and harsh treatments that had happened here, like electroshock therapy and ice bath immersion. Some patients were even kept locked in cages out in the yard, exposed to the elements, Walter said with a solemn expression. The asylum's early practices were quite barbaric. We walked through hallways, made even creepier by peeling paint, crumbling plaster, and flickering lights. The deeper we went, the heavier the air felt, thick with a tragic history. Walter showed us an autopsy theater, where he said doctors had performed experimental procedures on patients without consent. One woman on the tour asked Walter if he really believed ghosts wandered these halls. "Oh, I know they do," he replied. "In all my years here, I had experiences." He declined to elaborate, but I felt the hairs on my neck prickle as we continued into a grimy, tiled room, the electroshock therapy chamber. An old gurney sat beneath a hanging light fixture. "This is where they fried patients' brains trying to shock them sane," Walter said. "Let's keep moving," I mutter, unsettled by the energy in the room. But suddenly we heard a loud clang behind us. We all wheeled around to see one of the tour group's cameras had fallen off a tripod and crashed to the floor. "My camera was totally stable. I don't know how it just fell over," the woman said nervously as she retrieved it. Walter's face had gone pale. "We should leave this area," he declared. As we moved to the upper floors, Walter was unusually quiet. In the waning afternoon light, the asylum took on an even more unearthly feel. Our footsteps echoed eerily off the peeling wallpaper and cracked plaster. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the dark doorways yawning open along the corridor. Walter showed us the nurses' station. Patient dorms and hydrotherapy room suddenly seemed preoccupied, frequently glancing around with a tense expression. In one dim patient bedroom, the tour group let out startled yelps as the bulbs in a ceiling light fixture suddenly popped and went dark. "Odd," was all Walter said before rushing us all out of the room. "Is everything okay?" I asked once we were back in the hall, noticing a thin sheen of sweat on Walter's forehead. "Let's head downstairs." "No," he replied tersely, ignoring my question. As we descended the grand but crumbling staircase, I felt my adrenaline rising. I wasn't sure if it was paranoia or an actual ominous presence, but I began sensing unseen things in the shadows. The heavy front doors were in sight when we heard a blood-curdling shriek echo from the upper floor, as if coming from the room we had just left. The tour group froze. "That was no ghost. We have to help them," I cried, running back for the stairs. But Walter seized my arm forcefully. His eyes were filled with fear, even panic. "We need to get out of here, immediately," he shouted. "There's no one to help." Confused and frightened, we followed Walter as he broke into a frantic jog for the exit. The shrieks and howls continued, growing fainter as we fled across the yard. Bursting outside at last, we hurried through the gates to the parking area. As I glanced back, I saw pale faces peering down from the asylum windows. Or were they just my imagination? "What happened in there?" I demanded, catching up to Walter at his car. "You don't want to know," he muttered, getting into his car. As he sped towards the gates, I noticed his hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Just before passing through the gates, his car swerved violently, as if avoiding something in the road. My heart pounded as I ran to my own car. Peeling out down that winding road, I swore I saw shadowy figures creeping along the tree line in my rearview mirror. I decided to do some digging into the asylum's history when I got home. What I discovered was more chilling than any ghost story. Political corruption had allowed a sadistic asylum superintendent to conduct barbaric experiments on patients for years. Some had even died from his treatments. When the truth came out, the superintendent committed suicide on the premises. His evil acts had opened a portal to sinister forces, which haunted the asylum to this day. After the superintendent's death, patients reported seeing his ghost stalking the halls, and violent paranormal activity increased. Staff experienced unexplained equipment failures, screams, and apparitions. Many refused to stay past nightfall or enter certain possessed areas. As I learned all of this, details from the tour clicked into place. The dropped camera in the electroshock room, the light bulb explosion, the shrieking specter we had apparently narrowly escaped. Clearly, Walter had known far more than he let on about the evils still dwelling within those abandoned buildings, hungry to torment visitors and feed on fear. I shuddered at the realization that in my fascination and naivete, I had ventured recklessly into a true heart of darkness, whose grim secrets were better left buried. If curiosity draws me back again someday, I will not go alone. But for now, the Willard Asylum remains shrouded in shadow, its haunted history a warning to any who dare enter. For once you cross that threshold, you never know what might follow you back out.